Got it.
Welcome to the Nerds and Friends podcast. We have our awesome co-host Carey DuVal with us today. I'm
Hi,
Josh
everybody.
Lindquist, and right now we're talking about Kidzilla. Carey, tell us more about Kidzilla.
All right. Well, so the way we got to this part of the conversation was I didn't like reading short stories when I was a kid because it always felt like kind of a cock tease. Like you get a few pages, maybe like a chapter's length of something that is interesting or not, considering that usually it was assigned reading, and like you just never got to like read anything by the same author or anything. But then I remembered that probably the book, the horror anthology book that kicked off my love of horror as a kid was this book called The Psycho Zone, Kidzilla and Other Tales. It's by an author named David Lubar, Lubar, and it. I think I got it because of the cover at a Scholastic book fair when I was a kid, and all the stories in it are things that pop up in my head on like a constant basis because they run the gamut of being like really dark to like the kind of creepy Twilight Zone fun. Like some of them are just fucked up. Like there's the two most fucked up ones I can think of are called The Sand Shark, which is where like two kids are at a beach and one of the kids like kind of makes up this little like ghost story on the spot, like, ooh, you need to watch out for the sand sharks. And his little sister's like, stop it. And then his leg starts getting sucked into the sand. And the sister's convinced that he's just fucking with her until he completely disappears and is like devoured by a sand shark. And then she just like runs off. And it is like, well, I guess I'm just gonna have to watch for the sand sharks now. And another one is about a babysitter who's like watching this 6-year-old at a park, and like that she keeps seeing kids that like there's more and more kids all of a sudden at this park, but there's no other babysitters or parents, and she kind of picks up that they're just like they're multiplying out of this slide, like some sort of weird. They're like these weird pod people kids, and eventually she tries to like take the kid she's babysitting and run, and they just grab her and feed her into the top of the slide, and she's absorbed by whatever creature is producing these kids.
Oh, I just got chills. That's creepy as fuck. I love that.
Isn't it? And it's from 1997, so I want to say I was in 3rd grade when I got this.
Yeah,
maybe. And it's still one of the like, and I think it might be one of those things because it was the same author the whole time, and it was all these like really twisted. It was like a lot of like Far Side comics and like the Calvin and Hobbes stuff that like could have gotten a little bit creepier, just kind of like dialed up.
Okay.
And it's super weird. I loved it.
That's fun.
Yeah. I'd recommend probably going back and reading it to anybody that actually wanted to read the book. Again, it's called The Psycho Zone. I don't know if David Lubar has been creating books
since 1997.
Yeah, or if it was like his one-hit wonder, but like it was fascinating as a kid, and I still consider myself a particularly creepy adult, probably because of that.
I've been thinking about short stories because most of the stories I think of tend to be broader in scope to where a full novel or a full screenplay would tell them. Like I have a hard time writing short films, even though I'd like to produce more of those, But I was talking to, if I may name drop, author Philip Fracassi when I worked with him on a project, and he was saying that he actually makes more money from his short film or his short stories than he does from his novels. By publishing in anthologies and publications and magazines, he said he's able to make a lot more money. That's his main bread and butter is short stories, short horror in particular. And then he goes on and does novels here and there. But I found that fascinating.
That is cool as hell. Honestly, the thing that made me want to start reading short stories again, um, was over the pandemic. I got that subscription to Masterclass, and I took the Neil Gaiman one immediately because I'm a huge Neil Gaiman fan. And he had a segment on short stories, and the way he described a short story was, a short story is the last chapter of a book that you didn't have to write.
Oh, I like that a lot.
And that framing, how like a chapter is in and of itself supposed to have a beginning, middle, end. It's got to have a conflict. Like every chapter of a book or like scene of a movie has to have that same structure. You have to tell a story within that, even if it's just character dynamics, was very interesting to me. And it's but it's also something that you could always springboard off of into the first chapter of a book, if it's something like the book I'm working on right now. Honestly, the first the first chapter, or at least the prologue, which has bounced around like where it was going to be in the book for a while until I think I settled on it as the prologue, is very much a it's a fantasy universe retelling of me getting blown up in Afghanistan, and like what would be the mechanisms and everything around that. But the interesting thing about it, is I haven't tweaked it a whole lot, but it in and of itself is a pretty solid little story in and of itself, specifically because it's such a far flashback from where the rest of the story is taking place. Like, it's years before, and it's its own begin, middle, end with a bit of a cliffhanger on it.
Yeah.
And that, like framing that as like this is a short story is actually kind of an interesting thought that just occurred to me.
Yeah. No, and I think if you were to make your chapters like short stories of their own, that would have a lot of extra impact to the reader.
Mm-hmm.
Which I'm reading yours chapter by chapter now. They do feel very episodic. I can tell you're implementing that advice from Neil Gaiman and giving your chapters that arc in every single one, where it's like there's the conflict that ramps up and then it has a resolution, but there's still room for more. And it's like, send me more, please.
I really dig that as far as like a chapter goes, because it'll keep it keeps me wanting to write it. And there's times when like I'll have the outline for how far a chapter is going to go, and then I'll hit like a button, where it's like the conflict is resolved enough, like this small conflict, and it feeds in the larger conflict. That's where I'm like, that's where I'm going to chop the chapter right now. And part of that's like going back, like knowing when to say I'm done for the day on this chapter, and then going back the next day or the next week with those fresh eyes and being like, all right, now that I've gone farther along in fleshing out things, like what do I need to change? What do I need to go back and like structure?
Yeah.
Honestly, like
that's a good process.
I'm enjoying it. It took me a while to figure out that that particular groove of like I try and write a chapter, and depending on how long it is, like the shorter ones are usually about a little over 1,000 words, and my longer ones are a little over 3,000. But like I try and get one of those done a day so I can. And then I think part of the button for me, if I can keep blabbing about my shit,
please
is
do.
Putting that button on there, especially when I start feeling myself like fatiguing on the actual writing. I still want to write more of the story, and it leaves it percolating in my skull. Where like I was just telling our buddy Will today, like I drew something last night, and I woke up and I was like, I know what I need to fix in that drawing, or like I know what was getting me stuck in that next chapter. And then I just forced myself to go back and like, now I know what the next chapter is, because I already have the framework and the outline.
Yeah.
Now I know where I want the next chapter to go, and I just make sure that like it is leading up to that in the chapter prior. And the cool thing about the way that's worked, because I have reworked the structure a few times, is even when I get like hard stuck, like I have been for a couple weeks, I went back to the beginning
Mhm.
of the book and I started kind of, because the characters have developed like in their personalities more over time,
Yeah.
and going back and kind of rewriting them with like, all right, like the vibe is right or their action is right, but their dialogue, it would be more this, or even like their dialogue's good, but like this isn't the action that the character that we know now
Yeah.
but would have taken at that point. That's
Bringing it
that's
all into
how
alignment. I love it.
yeah, that's how that chapter became. That's how that blown up in the mythical country of Kozul chapter became the prologue, because like this, you know, that's not the first story that the main character would tell. Like that's actually
Right.
the story that precedes the story.
That makes total sense. But
Mhm.
for the reader
Uh,
coming in with that, it's like a big like, here you go, you know?
Yeah, that was what hooked the guys at the Veteran Writers Project at the Writers Guild,
Yeah.
because I think I told you like I'd never written a script or anything, and but they were like, hey, we just send us writing, like we don't care if it's a book or a short story, or like they said they've selected people on poetry in the past,
Oh wow.
and and I was like, okay, here's the first two chapters of a book that I'm writing on, and I think the second chapter I've completely like shredded and turned into something else, but like that being blown up chapter was in there, and and that was actually the thing that Kira, the one who did my interview to get me into the finalists and everything, she was like, this is good and I really want to read more,
Nice.
and that was that, like I was like, all right, cool, like we got something. It's not, because as much as I like telling the story, I want people to read it.
Yeah.
On that note though, I'm curious about um your your day-to-day process, like because you've been doing a lot more writing recently. What's your most recent rhythm? What have you been doing?
My rhythm, I tend to write better in the mornings, but I've been doing evening writing as well.
Mhm.
And honestly, I've got an outline for my book, and it's pretty much one paragraph summarizing each chapter. So I've been going
Mhm.
through and writing the chapters, and I'm trying to have more of a cliffhanger at the end of each to kind of go into
Nice.
the next chapter. And that's what I've been working with, and it's been fun. And I've been really focusing on having a more, I don't know, just characters that are just more like side characters, but giving them a little bit of personality and letting the
Yeah.
reader draw the rest around it. Because I noticed that I would do that with stories growing up, where there'd be a small character with one or two cool quirks. And I'd be like, I
Uh-huh.
like that character. And I'd kind of like focus in on them, even though there wasn't that much. And that's what I've kind of been doing in my book, you know?
Dude, that's awesome. Okay, so I know that I'm very late to the internet in general, but Will turned me on to this YouTube channel called Overly Sarcastic Productions,
Okay.
and there's one, there's two hosts. I haven't seen anything from OSP Blue, but OSP Red does tropes and mythology breakdowns,
Okay.
and they are I've been watching a lot of her Trope Talk series, and the one I just watched literally to burn time before hopping on this call was about a character, like a character archetype called the Lancer.
The Lancer. Tell me more.
So the Lancer is, and I'm going to absolutely fuck this up. Please go check out this video after this. But the Lancer is usually the right hand man to the main character,
Okay.
and it's a very very diverse subset or archetype, because it's a character that is there. It's the closest foil to the hero character, I believe, is what OSP Red said.
Closest. Oh,
And
because initially when you said that, my mind went to like Chewbacca.
yeah, so it would be a Chewbacca, and Chewbacca to Han Solo specifically,
Exactly.
because Han and Chewbacca fall into another trope, which is called the five-man band, another great video that OSP Red did. But actually, a Lancer would be Han Solo to Skywalker, because
Oh,
Luke Skywalker being the hero, the Lancer is usually the supporting character that is interesting, because they're a little bit spicier. They're a little bit they can like kind of have that dark or sarcastic bent. Like Han Solo is kind of a perfect Lancer, because where
yeah.
Luke is like young and inexperienced and optimistic and like, oh, you don't believe in the Force, do you? And here's just Han Solo, who's a dude that just murked a guy in Mos Eisley for, you know, wanting to take him to Jabba. And he's just like, I've seen a lot of shit, and like you're cute, but like the real world's the real world. And like I'm not gonna fuck with the rebellion, like all that. Like he's an excellent foil character. And actually the thing that I got out of this Lancer video from OSP Red is that Lancers, when done really well, have like at least a lot of Red's examples were, they have my favorite arcs.
Okay.
I usually I like heroes a lot, you know, especially like slightly damaged heroes or heroes with like a really good heroic flaw. I'm a big fan of Greek myth for that reason. But like the most overblown example is Vegeta from Dragon Ball Z, who starts as a villain, and just like it's not that he never stops being the villain, he's just not the biggest threat at any given time,
Okay.
and has to team up with Goku. And I I like that particular arc of just like, this is a dude who started as a villain and he just kind of settled into having a family and living on Earth and
Okay.
tolerating this dude that he thinks is like so much lower than him.
Yeah.
And because of that, he's interesting. And it also it's a good like internal clash for the hero. And it's you'd probably really dig the video. And I think I very much support making characters.
Yes. Send it my way after this. I want to watch it now. Because I was
Oh
trying to
yeah.
think as we've been talking, I'm like, who's the Lancer in my new book I'm writing? And it would definitely be, well, there's like two Lancers. There's Mirabella, the character that you created in our awesome D&D campaign. She comes
Awesome.
in and she's kind of a foil to Jirah, who's he's a little more aggressive, but not quite as much as Mirabella. And then
Uh-huh.
there's a character named Caligon, who's like a Balaran, which is my version of a Dragonborn. And
Okay.
she's very much like jaded, to the point, deadly, doesn't really have any, she's dispassionate. She doesn't really like, she's just kind of like, hey, they told me to come help you guys out, so I'm going to help you guys out. And if that involves killing or torturing people, that's fine. And
Mm.
everyone else is like, wow, that's bizarre, but okay.
Well,
So
and that fits. There's no limit on Lancers, because it's a really diverse archetype. It can be everything from like a reformed villain or like slightly antagonistic to like the full support lieutenant. Like it's a really interesting archetype. And like I was doing the same thing with a lot of the characters in my book, where I was like, okay, like there is a hero that that is definitely like at least the focus of the first book.
yeah.
And I was thinking about the two other protagonisty support characters, and I was like, oh, both of these are like, they like, one leans a little bit more Lancer, one leans a little bit more as like the emotional heart of the story, but they're both both of those things at the same time, just kind of different reflections of it.
Right.
And the interesting like dynamic between those three is in the second story that I'm bubbling up. Actually, one of the Lancers becomes the focus of the story and becomes more the hero. And the interesting thing about that is that the other two characters still work really well as Lancers for them.
Okay. Is
And
Lee the Lancer you're talking about?
Lee is the Lancer I'm talking about. And the second I really like, I came up with something with Will with the way that Lee's going to be handled in the second story,
Yeah.
where Lee's going to have the hardest like fall
Okay.
after the first book in a big way, and completely going to have to like relearn how to adapt to their new situation. And in that, my brain keeps going back to Mad Max Fury Road,
Yeah.
one of my favorite movies of all time, where like the movie's called Mad Max, it's about Furiosa.
Absolutely.
And Mad Max is like cool to have around. He's a great character as like a catalyst for Well, he's not even a catalyst. He is like the guy that is just capable enough to get him out of some shit and into some more shit.
Yeah,
And but Furiosa's like the driving factor. And I think like that Lee in that second book is very much the focus in the same way that Furiosa was, whereas Watcher will be not really relegated, but like a lateral move into sharing the spotlight as more the Mad Max in that relationship.
that's a very cool way to do your sequel. I'm excited.
I'm real excited about it. I've heard it'll be interesting to get into it because I really like getting into different characters' heads and like how they function and everything. But I also, I don't want to like we'll see how it works out because I don't want to totally like blow up the tone.
Yeah, but the first book is all, well, it seems like it's some of it's from Lee's perspective and a lot of it's from Watcher's perspective.
Mm-hmm.
So for the second book, are you going to kind of like just inverse that where it's mostly going to be Lee's perspective and then a little bit from Watcher? Or what are you thinking on that?
I've got a couple ways that I could do it. I think the second book might be it could be exactly like you said. It could be Lee focused with Watcher, with Watcher's perspective being more secondary. But also the characters are all going to be in the same place more often. Like they're not really going to be as split off as they are in the first book.
Yeah, because the
So
first book they're very much coming together and forming their initial bond.
yeah, exactly. And
Right.
like the with the second book, like it could either be that Lee is this focus or with like Watcher as kind of a support, or it could just be that Lee is the story focus without it entirely being in their head the whole time. And the cool thing about that is like it's like I said, it's all a fantasy universe. There's going to be magic and different species, like all sorts of things, like governmental structures. But like I keep coming back to like the things that are fun for me are like high adventure stories.
Yeah.
And where the first book is going to be like it's going to be an adventure, but it's also getting these characters over trauma. That second story is definitely in my head like much more that kind of um Indiana Jones hopping around to do to have like an adventure kind of thing, with the push being some of the events from the first book, but it being like more rounded out with like it may not be a fetch quest, it may not be a just go get here quest, but I do want it to be a little bit more like adventure novelty, which I think would be fun. And that's kind of what the book you're working on right now is like, right?
Yeah, because my first book, Exile in the Sand, was very much about dealing with trauma and especially like religious trauma, and being the dangers of being overzealous. Ooh, we got a Havoc cameo coming up. Oh, yeah, I thought we had a Havoc cameo coming up.
No, Havoc's chilling after getting the bath. I was going to grab. I was like, yeah, it's on the coffee table.
Thank you. That's awesome.
Yes, thick. I could kill an intruder with it.
It is. It's a thick one. It's thick.
Mm-hmm.
Thick with two C's.
Yep.
But yeah, so that one's very much focused on the main character's arc, whereas my second book is more of an ensemble cast, more of an adventure. There is characters who were framed for murder and some characters who are kind of fleeing from an attack. So there are different little arcs within. I think I have it's like 6 main characters. And I alternate between telling the story from their points of view, which is super fun. And I just recently did a chapter from Mirabella's point of view, which was super fun to write. And I cannot wait to share it with you. At one point, she's whittling. She finds a piece of wood that looks like it has a little face in it, and she gives it eyebrows and says, "Holy fuck, I'm good at everything, aren't I?" And I was just like, "That's perfect."
That's amazing.
Yes.
So interesting thing about the being framed for murder, that just because like I'm super interested in this. How are you handling like the fact that up until even very recently in history, you could grow a mustache and move 20 miles away and say your name is John Stein and basically just get away, the guy who moved to the village a couple of years ago, like until someone like comes and stumbles upon your ass that you like knew specifically, like you could get away with that stuff. How's stuff like that factoring in? Like how's like crime and getting away with it in your story?
So I definitely thought of these things. So of the three main characters who are framed for murder, and then they kind of, as they're uncovering things, they bring in the other central characters into the story. But with one of them, they have family in the city where they were framed for murder. So because they're exiled from the city, they're like, I need to clear my name so I can go back and support my family, because she was like the main worker for her family, providing them food and stuff. So she wants to go back and help them. And then for the other two characters, they're worried about, for one of them, it's their honor. They're like, hey, I can't be considered a murderer in a city. And then for another one, it's more of he's worried about if the people who framed him for murder find out that they're exiled and not rotting in a dungeon or executed, that they might come and try to finish the job. So it's very self-defense, proactive of, okay, I got to find these people before they find me type of thing. So that was how I handled it.
That's some good character motivation. Will helped me out with that when I was driving back to LA a couple days ago, because like when I'm driving, especially on long drives, I'll just kind of go into my head and unfurl story stuff.
Yeah.
And I was telling him about these, like all these ideas I had for the second story, because like I do have the first book pretty well locked down.
That's awesome.
Like structure wise, but like I keep coming up with these ideas, and especially like when you're driving in the middle of the night through Utah, like something will just hit you, and I called up Will and scared the shit out of him because he thought I'd like crashed or something. I was like, I know what the governmental structure of Black Hole is like. And he's just like,
that's awesome.
And he's like, all right. So I was like, it's like, I didn't know what it was before. I knew the rest of the triumvirate, but Black Hole, this is how Black Hole works. And he's like, all right, cool. Like, tell me about it. But I was talking about character motivations, and I didn't really have a good one for Cyrene, the innkeeper, who's like, in the first book, she's kind of like low key, like I just kind of want to help people. Like, the triumvirate might have wronged me, but like I live where I live, and I'm trying to just help as many people as I can slowly. And like I didn't really think about how her mentality would have changed after like basically everything fucking blows up on her at the end of that first book. And Will was the one who brought up like, hey dude, like, do you think that Cyrene would be fucking spoiling for a fight at this point? Do you think that she would be the Warhawk of the party now? Whereas
that's a big shift from where she was. I like that.
Yeah, and it made sense because now she's a contrast with Watcher, because Watcher at the end of the book, he's experienced like what that drive for vengeance feels like. And then like his vengeance is done. Like, and he's like, okay, now's the time to ride off into the sunset and be left alone forever. And Cyrene's the one that's like, no, because these same fuckers are still out there.
Yeah.
And then you've got Lee, who's experiencing their own stuff. And basically, like, I'm thinking the beginning of the second book is like them very much clashing about what to do next until
I like that.
Until things like fall into their lap, which I always dig as a story mechanism. Not really like fall into their lap, but basically it's like there's not a whole lot you can run away from anymore at this point.
Yeah, the conflict is where it has to be gone through instead of around. That's the best for storytelling.
And that that it has to be a choice concept of like
the problem is choice.
Yeah, the problem is the whole thing here. And I had this freaking like sauna thought when I was at the gym today, because I go to the climbing gym over here next to LAX that has a sauna that gets up to fucking ungodly hot, and for some reason boiling my brain helps me unstick stuff.
It
And
works. It works.
I had this thought because I keep thinking that they're gonna go and they're gonna find some people who are like really well established, like half demon kind of, like it's a family. They're very much going to be based off the Medici from the Renaissance.
Okay.
And wow, I said Renaissance real weird with the stuff he knows. But it's very much going to be the Medici, and I had this idea that they're talking to the elder of the family, and I had this line, it's like, what's the that this elder would say, it's like, everything is a game, and so what's the purpose of a game? The purpose, and the characters would be like, it'd be to win the game, or it'd be to get better at the game, and they'd just be like, no, the purpose of a game is to figure out what game you're playing and figure out what game you need to play.
Oh, I like that.
And that, it's Medici, it's a little bit of Machiavelli, like it, and it's a very dumb version of Machiavelli, because I was a history major, not a classics major. But like it kind of like it hits this this arc of choice, like, okay, you like, because I like the thought of like, you like, this is the game that you've been raised to think that you need to play, right? But now I'm going to go with a modern example, like, but if you were raised in a family that specifically plays basketball and you are just not good at basketball for whatever reason,
Like,
what
you're
are you
short
going
and
to do?
fat like me. No, I'm just kidding.
Or no, or like that was a very specific thing to me too, like, because like I was really bad at basketball, and it was because up until seventh grade nobody knew I needed glasses.
Oh,
So like, and also I was also a short and fat kid. So I learned how to, I taught myself martial arts, and now it's a lifelong passion. So like, I like, if you're raised entirely around basketball, but you're not good at basketball, do you just keep playing basketball because basketball is all you know? You find another game, or like you find another way to, or in the terms of something like Moneyball, you figure out what the most important aspect of the game is that you can actually capitalize on. And that I like the idea of that being much more of like a theme,
yeah.
and it's super rough, and it might completely get thrown out because it was from boiling my brain this morning. But I
like it.
I
And
like that
I'm
idea of
thinking
choice.
about now how each character is going to react to that. Like, I can see
Mhm.
how Watcher's going to be like, good, I'm doing that. I've done that work. I'm living my new game now. Whereas Cyrene's going to be like, I need to be going into a new game. I need to be getting in the game of hunting instead of protecting, and kind of having
Mhm.
that internal battle. So that's fascinating.
And Lee at this point is going to be like, all right, I've lost the game. I haven't just lost the game. I've lost my ability to play the game. Like, so I'm out. And that's where the, and that's like Lee's personal conflict. And that's where, as long as I'm not, and Lee's going to have enough of a unique arc
Yeah,
that it's going to be a different story about getting over disability and the consequences of your actions.
okay.
But like the reason that I like that Lee's going to be going through that is Lee's officially going to be going through that with two other characters that have now experienced that and been helped by not just each other, but by Lee in recovery. And that's going to be a big forward thrust for Lee.
That's huge. I love that.
I thought it could be fun.
When you talked about being a history major, not a classics major, it made me think back to college at good old CU Boulder. And I really am bitter about how much my religious adherence in college shut down my open-mindedness and critical thinking. And I kind of just wanted to bring that up because it popped in my head, I'm definitely more open-minded, and I would hope I'm better at critical thinking now. But I think that's one of the allures of religion is you can rely on things other than critical thinking, and it's easier, even though it's not correct.
Mhm.
It's just a path of least resistance. And I think that's why it appeals to a lot of people.
Well, I think there's a lot of organizations that in which that appeals to people. I mean, to be entirely honest, like I've talked in therapy with my VA therapist about, one of the things that I didn't really notice was I growing up, I didn't learn how to set a lot of boundaries. And a good chunk of that was like you go from living in your parents' house to I went straight into college and ROTC. Like you don't, you take orders and you don't really say no a whole hell of a lot, and then you go straight into the army from there. And then like as much as you feel like you might be a critical thinker or you think about when you stop and you find yourself and you're like, why am I doing this? Or this seems wrong. And you try and backtrack, you try and go back and say, hey, this is messed up. And then you get the inbuilt authority that you've never been able to say no to, saying, well, just fucking do it. That's that I think is fairly like uh that also can be a common theme. Like
Oh
for
yeah.
me it was the military. For you it was this religion is something that makes me feel more safe because I have some answers based off of some things that I know.
Or imagine I knew. Yeah.
Or imagine it's something that you were comfortable with, and you've told me about how that was like a bit of your cocoon, right?
It was absolutely a cocoon, and it was a way of dealing with stress and fear, and the fact that I'm not very good at boundaries either, and the fact that I'm not very good until recently at emotional regulation.
Mhm.
I didn't realize this scientific concept that thoughts are just, or feelings are just signals about your surroundings. They don't require action. They don't require you to do anything. They're just signals. And so learning that, okay, I can control these things and just be more resilient and more I don't know, what's the word? Have self efficacy, it's been a
Yeah.
huge change for me because I went from the cocoon of religion and then I lost that and I realized, oh, hey, there's this fun thing called alcohol. Let me just drink that all the time. So alcohol is my new cocoon. And now I'm learning to live free of cocoons, and it's very exhilarating and growth provoking.
Well, you're allowing yourself to have that agency too.
Yeah.
And I think that's something that's really cool. Like because I was talking with another friend of mine about how the brain processes trauma different than it processes your average memory. And basically, like there's been some preliminary studies, and I'm going to be a bad internet person and not cite them because I heard it from a friend who is studying versions of psychology. So at least I'll give her that. Um, but it's this thought that traumatic memories are not stored temporally in the brain. They're not stored on the timeline. That's
Oh,
why when something reminds you of a traumatic event, why it feels like it that's why it feels like it's happening again.
oh, okay.
And like I had that recently. I was done with I had spent 3 weeks for Christmas at in Colorado, hanging out with friends and being with people. And then a day before I had to leave, I was anxious as fuck. I was panicking and I didn't know why. And basically, I had to break it down that my brain was suddenly convinced that I was going to be late getting back to base from leave.
Oh,
And because that was always the wait until the last minute and then drive the wheels off the car to get back to North Carolina or Fort Campbell
right.
or Fort Bragg or wherever. And I was like, I'm I'm freaked out by this. And it's because like I just got out of the army, and for a decade, Christmas my Christmas pattern has been you take off that 2 weeks for Christmas, you go home, you have a great time with your family, and then you got to go back to the grind. And the grind is entirely dependent on how much you are enjoying your chain of command and how much you're enjoying your job at the time.
Absolutely.
And I didn't realize how much that was affecting me until I was driving through Grand Junction, and I couldn't calm down, and I couldn't figure out why I was spiraling. But like that's, because and I think then this is why my friend talked about how trauma being non-temporal, even though that is a more recent stress based off of how miserable I was my last 2 years in the army, as opposed to the rest of the time before that I loved.
Yep.
It was still like that was why it was stressful. So
That totally
like
makes sense.
you're like religious trauma, freaking alcohol trauma. Like the reason that it feels so real and so quick might just be because it's not a memory that your brain says is 10 years ago.
Right. No, I'm really proud of you for handling that, man, because that shit hits you hard.
Oh yeah.
It hits hard.
Spirals can be rough, but luckily therapy,
Yes.
specifically for me, cognitive processing therapy, which has been a fucking gift. So
That's amazing. Yeah. For me, cognitive behavioral therapy and then dialectical behavioral therapy has helped me a lot with dealing with emotional regulation and my various cocoons that I like
I've heard
hide in.
really good things about both of those, actually. The whole reason that I got into CPT and the worksheet based stuff was because of a This American Life called 12 Sessions that I listened to, and it follows a lot of the same principles as CBT and DBT, from what I understand. It's just worksheet based, and I was this American Life really said that they'd had a lot of really good success with PTSD.
That's awesome.
And so yeah, and like I'm very much I'm a, not that I wasn't a proponent before, but I was a proponent of therapy for like, oh yeah, you guys go to therapy, like that
Right.
was
Same here.
that was me being a proponent while I was in the army, because it's like I know I got issues. I'm not going to go talk to anybody, but
Yeah. But no, therapy, I go weekly. It's a lifesaver. It's great.
oh yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Well, dude, I have another meeting in 10 minutes, so now's a great stopping point. But this was an excellent podcast. We covered so much, dude. I appreciate your time. This was great.
Hey, dude, I've got the time. I can't wait to jump back on again.
Awesome, awesome, awesome. We'll definitely do it again soon, my friend.
All right, see you later, Josh.
Cool. I'm going to end the recording here.
Awesome.